My uncle stood at the head of the conference table and laughed in my face. The room was full. 12 people at minimum, the entire board, plus the company's outside legal team, and 3 loan officers from their primary bank. He was loud about it, the way he always was when he wanted an audience. He told the room I had shown up to a shareholder meeting, dressed like I was applying for a receptionist job. Then the senior loan officer from Meridian Bank set down his pen, stared at something on the lapel of my blazer, and went completely white. He stood slowly, like a man getting to his feet after being hit. "Wait," he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it across the table. "Is that really her?" My uncle stopped laughing. The hand he'd been using to gesture at me, still mid-air, began to shake. "My name is Veda. I'm 29 years old. For the past 4 years, I've been the silent managing partner of Crestline Capital, a private credit firm based in Boston that holds construction financing for a significant portion of the Northeast's mid-market real estate industry. In the world where it matters, people call me the anchor, because when I attach myself to a debt portfolio, the only direction things move is down, for whoever's on the wrong end of the leverage. To my Uncle Clifford's family, I was the broke niece he tolerated out of obligation, the one who drove a 10-year-old Civic and worked some accounting job, the one he had always considered small. He had no idea those 2 versions of me could belong to the same person. I had spent 4 years making sure he didn't. Before I tell you how I legally dismantled the man who built his entire legacy on my grandmother's name, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe the most powerful revenge is the kind that arrives in writing. Certified, irrefutable, and delivered by a federal courier. The reading of my grandmother's estate happened on a Tuesday morning at the offices of my uncle's company, the Delmar Group, a regional real estate development firm that my grandmother Eleanor had quietly seeded with her own savings 40 years ago. She was the kind of woman who said very little and noticed everything. She raised 2 kids alone after my grandfather died young. She worked double shifts at a hospital laundry for 11 years before she started buying small properties. She built something real from nothing with her own hands. When she died in January, I flew home from Boston on 2 days' notice. My uncle barely acknowledged me at the funeral. My cousin Bryson, Clifford's son, 30 years old, already VP of Business Development, despite never once closing a deal that wasn't handed to him, looked at my off-the-rack black dress and smiled the kind of smile people aim at someone they've already decided doesn't count. The estate attorney read the will in Clifford's conference room. My uncle sat at the head of the table with his wife Suzanne immediately to his right. She was a sharp-featured woman with a rigid smile and the perpetual expression of someone who had just smelled something unpleasant. Bryson sat across from me, feet kicked up on the chair beside him like he owned the building. As far as he knew, he did. My grandmother left me 17% of the outstanding shares in Delmar Group. The room went dead quiet. I didn't move. I sat with my hands folded on the conference table and watched my uncle's face cycle through confusion, irritation, and then a cold, deliberate fury. 17% was technically a minority stake, but it came with full voting rights on any restructuring event, which mattered enormously because Delmar was 3 months away from a major refinancing that Clifford had been engineering for 2 years. Before the attorney finished reading the sentence, Clifford was already on his feet. He unbuttoned his jacket with slow, deliberate movements. The kind of slow that signals danger, walked to the whiteboard at the far end of the room and wrote a number, $85,000. He turned around and looked at me like I was a child who had been handed something sharp. "That's fair market value," he said. "I'll have the transfer documents drawn up tonight. Sign them before you leave town and this is settled." Fair market value for my portion would have been closer to $600,000. I knew that because I had run the valuation myself 3 weeks before my grandmother died, from a data room I wasn't supposed to have access to. But I did because the firm holding Delmar Group's $40 million construction credit facility was mine. I'll think about it, I said. That was apparently the wrong answer. Clifford capped the marker and came to stand directly in front of my chair, close enough that I could smell his cologne. He leaned forward with both hands flat on the table. Suzanne adjusted her pearls. Bryson straightened in his seat. You'll think about it, he repeated, tasting each word like it was a joke he was telling only for himself. Veda, you rent a studio apartment. You drive a car with a cracked rear bumper. You have a government-adjacent job and a salary that, if I had to guess, doesn't cover a single month of what this family has put into you over the years. He picked up the estate paperwork and tapped it against the table edge. Your grandmother was sentiment. That's all this is. Sentiment does not entitle you to a seat at this table. I didn't answer. I looked at the window behind him, gray November sky, bare trees. During the reading, while everyone's attention was on the attorney, Clifford had picked up a small gold brooch from the attorney's desk. The piece my grandmother had specifically designated for me by name, and slid it into his breast pocket. No one said anything. I watched him do it, and I said nothing. Because it didn't matter. Not yet. What happened next was designed to be the final humiliation. Clifford called his head of facilities into the conference room and, in front of the entire assembled family and legal team, announced that the 2014 Honda Civic in the visitor's lot was registered under a legacy Delmar Group insurance policy and needed to be retrieved as company property. The keys were in my coat pocket. I had known about this technicality for years. My grandmother had put the car on the company policy as a favor when I was 22. I had never taken it off because it didn't seem to matter. He had held it in reserve for exactly this kind of moment. Clifford held out his hand. I took the keys from my coat, set them on the table without looking at him, and stood up. Suzanne exhaled. A long, satisfied breath through her nose. Bryson smiled at his phone. I walked down 17 floors, through the lobby, and out into the November cold. Sleet was starting. I walked 2 blocks to a coffee shop, sat at a corner table, and ordered a black coffee. Then I called Lachlan. He picked up on the first ring. I take it went exactly as expected, he said. Initiate the margin call, I said, full $40 million, no grace period. A pause. Not hesitation, Lachlan never hesitated, just the quiet of a man making sure the instruction was logged correctly. Effective when? Monday morning, before markets open. I should explain what Crestline Capital actually is, because my uncle certainly didn't know. Most private credit firms work quietly. They sit behind LLC structures, holding companies, anonymous loan agreements. The people who run those firms don't typically appear in press coverage. They appear in debt covenants buried in subsections of loan agreements that borrowers' executives often don't read carefully enough. I had structured Delmar Group's credit facility myself, 18 months earlier, through 2 shell entities. Clifford's outside counsel had approved every page. Clifford had signed his name on page 31. He had no idea the person on the other side of that agreement was the niece he'd just tried to buy off for $85,000. There was a specific clause. If controlling interest in Delmar Group was transferred or restructured without prior written consent from the lender, Crestline Capital, the full outstanding balance became immediately due. Clifford had been quietly preparing to push through the refinancing and dilute my shares for weeks. I had known about it for weeks. I had let him keep planning because I needed him to move first. He moved first. On Thursday, Bryson arrived at my hotel room with 2 of the company's attorneys and a revised transfer agreement, more sophisticated than the first offer. Language designed to bury my voting rights inside a new holding structure while preserving some nominal financial interest on paper. He seemed proud of it. The offer, he leaned against the doorframe and told me the offer had been adjusted to $60,000 to account for legal processing costs. Take it, Bryson said, looking around my deliberately ordinary hotel room, or we file to contest the bequest. We have a doctor willing to testify that Grandma wasn't mentally clear when she updated the will. You don't have the resources for a probate fight. He smiled. Be realistic. I picked up the pen. I looked at the signature line. Then I signed, not my everyday signature. I used the formal execution mark I use on Crestline capital authorization documents, a specific, deliberate stroke that activates the transfer of authority clause embedded in our standard credit engagement agreements. It was a signature that meant something entirely different from what Bryson understood. He took the papers and left, still smiling. Lachlan called 20 minutes later. They filed the share restructuring with the state this afternoon, he said. Which triggers the covenant breach. Triggered at 4:47 p.m. We hold acceleration rights on the full facility. He paused. Bryson also submitted the document you signed to the Meridian Bank refinancing team as proof of clear title. Their counsel accepted it without independent review. I sat in the quiet hotel room and let that settle. What did they actually submit to the bank? I asked, though I already knew. A document that, per the authority clause you executed, designates Crestline as senior secured creditor with first priority claim on all Del Mar Group assets. Bryson handed the bank your appointment as controlling lender. He did it himself voluntarily, in writing. They had tried to eliminate me from the equation. They had handed me the entire company. By Sunday night, every account associated with Del Mar Group, operating accounts, payroll, project-specific draws on 4 active construction sites, was frozen pending Crestline's review. Clifford's personal guarantee extended that freeze to his personal wealth management accounts. On Sunday evening, Suzanne came to my hotel. She appeared at my door in a camel coat, eyes carefully moist, and told me Clifford had been hospitalized that afternoon. Stress-induced arrhythmia, she said, her voice practiced and soft. I knew he had attended a charity golf tournament that afternoon. Lachlan's team had pulled the event photos from the hosting club's public page 40 minutes after she called me. I let her in. She set a document on the table between us and called it a family reconciliation agreement. If I signed it, Clifford would acknowledge my inheritance and drop the probate contest. In exchange, I would relinquish my Del Mar shares and agree to a confidentiality clause covering all family business matters. I read the fine print, what it actually was. A complete release of liability for every transaction Clifford had run through my grandmother's name over the past decade, including several that were already under preliminary federal review. A review I knew about because Crestline had been cooperating with it since April. Suzanne held out a pen. I took it, and I signed. With the same Crestline execution mark, the same formal stroke that, under the document's own language, constituted the written lender consent that perfected our first priority lien on all Del Mar Group assets and completed the legal picture. Suzanne snatched the paper off the table before I had put the pen down. The manufactured grief vanished instantly. She told me I had made the smart choice and walked out without looking back. I called Lachlan and told him to file the completed lien perfection with the county recorder first thing Monday morning. Then, I called a different number. One I'd been holding since April, connected to a federal building in downtown Boston. I said the document had been signed and submitted. I said Tuesday morning would be the right moment. They said they'd be ready. The shareholder meeting was Clifford's own idea. An emergency session, called for Tuesday at 9, to ratify the refinancing terms and present the clean title documentation Bryson had rushed to compile over the weekend. He had no idea the refinancing was already void. He had no idea that the lender he expected to ratify his terms now existed in a form he couldn't have imagined in his worst night. I arrived by taxi, not because the alternative wasn't available to me, because I wanted to arrive exactly the way they expected, quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. Clifford and Bryson were in the lobby. The loan officers from Meridian were there too, along with the board members filing in from the elevator banks. Clifford saw me come through the revolving door and looked at my navy blazer, my flat shoes, my total absence of a legal team, and he laughed. Openly for the room, the way he had always performed confidence when he wanted witnesses. He told me I had one more opportunity to take a check and disappear. 50,000, he said, and I'd never have to come back. He stepped closer, the way he always did when he wanted his size to communicate what his words left out. And he told me in front of the loan officers and his attorneys, and his son, that whatever I thought I was doing by being in that building was several orders of magnitude beyond my experience. I didn't answer. I walked past him and took the elevator up. The conference room on the 31st floor had floor-to-ceiling windows, and the whole board assembled, and the 3 Meridian loan officers seated on one side with their portfolios open. I sat at the far end, alone, with my single portfolio flat on the table in front of me. Clifford entered last. He sat at the head and told the room he wanted to move quickly. There was a refinancing to ratify. The senior loan officer from Meridian opened his portfolio and reached for a document. Then he stopped. He looked at something on my lapel, a small silver compass rose pin, the insignia used by Crestline's authorized representatives in formal settings. It isn't decorative. In the world of private credit, it is not ambiguous. He looked at the name on the Crestline credit agreement in his stack. He looked at the authorized signature on the acceleration, notice his team had received Monday morning. He looked at the pin on my blazer. He set his pen down. I need to understand, he said slowly, looking at Clifford, who this person is. Clifford waved a hand. She's a family matter. Disregard her. I can't proceed. The loan officer stood. He was staring at me now with an expression I recognized. The specific look of someone watching something enormous and irreversible arrive from a direction they weren't watching. Is that really her? The managing partner of Crestline? Clifford stopped talking. Bryson's foot came down off the chair beside him. I unzipped my portfolio. There's something I want to say, honestly. I don't enjoy the moment people realize what's coming, even people who chose this. What I felt, looking down that table, was mostly tired. Tired of the particular performance of being underestimated. Tired of making myself small so the people who needed me small could feel large. What I felt was the specific relief of something that has been held for a very long time being set down. The refinancing cannot proceed, I said. Delmar Group is currently in default on its existing credit facility. As of Monday morning, Crestline Capital has accelerated the full $40 million outstanding balance and holds first priority liens on all company assets. That includes this building and the 4 active project sites in Providence, Hartford, Worcester, and Burlington. I placed the acceleration notice on the table and slid it toward the center. Furthermore, the share transfer Bryson filed on Friday did not eliminate my interest. It activated a covenant trigger that transferred full lender authority to Crestline. By submitting that document without independent legal review, Bryson conveyed to me, in writing, first priority claim on all Delmar Group equity as collateral. The document Suzanne signed on Sunday completed the lien perfection. That's not what those documents said, Bryson said. His voice did something it had probably never done before. It cracked right at the last word. It is precisely what they said, I told him. Section 14.3 of the credit agreement your father signed 18 months ago. The language was approved by your own outside counsel. Clifford's attorney had gone pale. He was flipping backward through his copy of the credit agreement. I watched him find Section 14.3. I watched him read it once, then again. There's more, I said. I set a second document on the table. It carried a government seal on the cover page. For the past 8 months, Crestline has been cooperating with a federal investigation into Delmar Group's vendor payment practices. Over 11 years, approximately $22 million in construction disbursements were routed through shell vendors to personal accounts controlled by my uncle and his son. Several of those accounts were opened in my grandmother's name, without her knowledge, used to move money, and closed after her death before probate opened. I looked at Clifford directly. She knew. She found out 2 years ago. She hired a private forensic accountant. She updated her will. She didn't go to the authorities herself because she spent those 2 years hoping you would stop. The room was absolutely silent. Federal agents are currently executing search warrants at Delmar's subsidiary offices in Providence and Hartford. 2 agents have been in the lobby downstairs since 8:30 this morning. Clifford stood up. His chair rolled back and struck the credenza. He opened his mouth, and for several seconds, nothing came out at all. Then he said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be authority and landing somewhere closer to a plea, "This company was built on my mother's name. This company was built on my grandmother's savings," I said, "and on her willingness to believe you when you told her everything was fine. The shares she left me aren't sentiment. They are the last thing she could do to make sure someone was actually watching." He listed sideways. I saw it, a slight loss of balance, a hand reaching back for the chair. Bryson came out of his seat and caught his father by the arm. "Dad." "Don't," Clifford said, shaking him off. But his grip on the chair back was the grip of a man holding on to the only solid thing left in the room. The agents came through the door 40 seconds later, quiet, professional. They spoke to Clifford directly, identified themselves, told him he needed to come with them. Bryson started to say something and was told to sit down. He sat. Suzanne, who had come upstairs to watch the ratification, to watch her plan complete itself, stayed in her chair with her hands flat on the table, and her expression perfectly blank, like stillness might make the morning reverse. Eventually an agent came to speak with her too. I closed my portfolio, walked to the elevator, and rode down 31 floors alone. 6 days later, I drove a rental car to the neighborhood where my grandmother had lived for 40 years. Her house was a white 2-story with blue shutters and a Japanese maple in the front yard she had planted herself in 1987. It was under a protective estate hold now. I had made sure that was the first thing filed. I sat in the car for a while without getting out. The last real conversation I'd had with her was 3 weeks before she died. She was very clear, very calm, the way she had always been when something important needed to be said. She told me she had known about the vendor accounts for 2 years. She told me she had tried to give Clifford the chance to correct it himself and he hadn't. She told me she was sorry it had taken so long. She wasn't crying. She just looked out the window at the maple tree and said she wanted someone to be watching when it mattered. And she had known for a long time who that someone was. She gave me the brooch that day. Not through the attorney, not as a line in a will. She pressed it directly into my palm and told me it had been her mother's, and her mother's mother's before that, and it was mine, and that was not a thing anyone could take. I had found it on the sidewalk outside the Delmar building on Tuesday afternoon, where Clifford had apparently lost it from his breast pocket when the agents walked him out. A security guard had set it on the reception desk. I recognized it immediately. I clipped it to the inside lining of my coat next to my own skin, and I walked to my car and I drove. I sat in front of her house in the gray December light, and I waited to feel something large and final. What arrived instead was smaller and truer, just quiet. The specific quiet of something long overdue being done. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt the way you feel after carrying something very heavy for a very long time and finally being allowed to set it down. I pulled away from the curb and pointed the car toward the airport. Lachlan had already forwarded 4 new portfolio reviews. There was a flight to Boston in 3 hours and a full week of work waiting on the other side of it. I had built something real, from nothing, the same way she had, slowly, quietly, in the dark. And I still had work to do. If you have ever had to build your life over from nothing while someone stood in your way and called it impossible, leave a comment below and share your story. Subscribe to Cherry Revenge and join a community of people who refuse to be what someone else decided they were.